Day to you, my dear students. Once again, I'm Sean Xavier Alcalita for the next topic for gender and society topic, which is the lesson 3 on gender and sexuality as a subject of inquiry. So let's proceed to the next slide. Okay, for the lesson objectives. So when you finish reading this chapter, you should be able to number 1, define gender studies, discuss its historical origins, and explain its importance in the society. Okay, for the operational definition of terms, gender study is a field of study concerned about how reproductive roles are interpreted and negotiated in the society through gender. Social research is the process of investigating social realities. Research approach is the orientation in understanding social realities. So it could either be a qualitative or quantitative or both. No? And ethics in research, these are considerations in conducting research to make sure that the well-being of the participants are ensured and that the outcome of the study is sound without undue harm to the people involved, most especially to the respondents of the study. So, introduction. So, gender seems so obvious and so simple. Many would ask why we have to study it. Well, gender studies as an area of knowledge is about looking into analyzing and examining society so that we notice power relations in the seemingly simple things. It helps us see the issues in our everyday lives through a different lens. In different cultures and different times in our history, gender roles played a big part of the social organization. Gender studies emerged from the need to analyze how gender, sex, and sexuality impact our lives, especially how it creates gender inequality. It came about in the mid 1970s after the second wave of feminism as a way to challenge the male defined and male centered knowledge. So, gender role or sex role are sets of culturally defined behaviors such as masculinity and femininity, according to the Encyclopedia of Sex and Gender. These roles are not fixed, such that the culturally defined behaviors for men and women may be different 50 years ago, or very different for people in the other countries or tribe, no? So most especially when we're dealing with the cultural relativism, no? So in a binary system of viewing gender roles, we only see the male and the female where men are expected to be masculine while women are expected to be feminine. This is the norm or the accepted standards of how to behave like a woman, such as in Filipino terms, that is what we call it as a mahinhin, or how to behave like a man, like in Filipino language as matapang or matipuno. Okay, so in gender studies, we are asked to disrupt and question these kinds of social expectations and gender roles and gender norms. Gender studies is not just for women, all about women, it is about everyone. It explores how our gender roles have changed throughout our history and how it created inequalities. 100 years ago, women were not allowed to study at the universities since their role was only restricted to domestic or the household. So, this repressed women's potential in shaping the social and political landscape in the past, but it also placed a burden on the men to provide for the whole family. Our society has changed so much since then. The jobs the jobs available for everyone is not so much dependent on the physical strength, making these jobs accessible to women as well. Most mothers also have a job now, so they also provide for the family. Gender studies would ask us to question, is it still right to say that the men are the providers of the family when both mothers and fathers now work and earn money? So, about diversity and inclusion. Gender roles are socially constructed and are not something that we are born with. Society, through a lifelong process of normalization, encourages or reprimands behaviors to make a child adapt to these social expectations. Just an example, a young boy is always encouraged to be brave, to play rough, to be loud, and not to show signs of weakness such as crying because uh, we were ori- uh, we were oriented when we were still a kid that that to cry means that it is a sign of being weak and a sign of being so-called as bayot, no? A young girl is discouraged from playing rough and being loud. Instead, they are told to be gentle and soft. So the difference here between the boys and girls in their childhood is that in order for them to be encouraged to be brave, they usually play the toys that are meant for in the language of masculinity, no? For example, guns and swords, robots, cars. So these are the toys that is being accentuated to the male gender, especially when when the boy is still at the play stage. No, a young girl is discouraged from playing rough. So that's why when they were still children, these girls were being encouraged to play, for example, cooking, playing the doll, Barbies. So so these are the toys that symbolizes being gentle and soft. So if a child does not follow these gender roles, they are reprimanded by parents, relatives, friends, or anybody that they interact with. That is how gender norm is forced upon individual, a lifelong process of normalization. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people often do not fit in the traditional binary gender roles, so they are often reprimanded, bullied, and discriminated. They are often subjected to violence and hate just because they do not fit in what society calls normal. Gender studies lets us analyze the creation and maintenance of these gender norms so that it does not create inequalities in our social, political, and economic spheres. Okay, so concerning about gender studies and research, so as a subject of inquiry, gender studies utilizes A systematic approach in identifying problems, making hypotheses and assumptions, gathering data and making conclusions. So this systematic process is also referred to as a research process. So, in the approaches in research, since gender and sexuality cuts across a variety of issues that could be biomedical, psychosocial, or political legal, there is no singular way in conducting the research process. There are, however, a variety of approaches which can be used. Okay, just an example. Another approach here is the qualitative approach. Focuses more on the meanings created and interpretations made by people about their own personal or vicarious experiences. For example, if you want to know how women, men, or LGBTQ plus live their lives on a daily basis and how they make sense of their lived experiences, then the qualitative approach is fitting. Some of the methods used in the qualitative approach as follows. So, there are different types of qualitative research like phenomenology. So, in phenomenology, conducting intensive interviews with individuals who have experienced a particular event and understanding their lived experience. The other one here is hermeneutics. So hermeneutics is the philosophy of interpretation. So if it is all about interpretation, then it implies the understanding of the meaning of the texts, no? Like literary works, artworks, and what they convey about the human realities, no? For example, hermeneutics. So how will you imply Jose Rizal's um, indolence of the Filipinos to the master and slave morality of Friedrich Nietzsche? So I guess that's a hermeneutics, no? That's one of the qualitative approaches in doing research process. The other one is what we call it as the ethnography and ethnomethodology, which means that immersing in a community, so you're going to immerse yourself in a community and taking note of their experiences, beliefs, attitudes, and practices. Okay, so the next one is one of the most common approaches in research process is what we call it as the quantitative approach. So this one focuses more on the characterizing a population, a total number of individual in a group, or a sample, so a subgroup within the population. And in some cases, making generalizations about the population based on the behavior of a sample. For instance, if you want to know how many Filipino adolescents are engaged in a romantic relationship, or how many of them still believe in marriage, then a quantitative approach is appropriate. Some of the methods used in the quantitative approach are as follows, like the most common is the survey. So survey is the collecting information from a sample, no? Another one is by doing the experimentation, no? Creating actual setups to observe behavior of people in an experimental group, a group receiving treatment such as training or a new experience, comparing it to the behavior of people in a control group, so which means it is a group without any treatment. So in most cases, information from both qualitative and quantitative approaches provide a holistic view about certain social realities, such that there are researchers who prefer to use mixed methods. Combining qualitative and quantitative methods to derive data from multiple sources. Okay, so how about the ethics in gender and sexuality research? There are some principles to remember in conducting gender and sexuality researches. So these principles are referred to as ethical principles because they make sure that people involved in the research are protected from harm or from manipulation. No? So ethics is a prerequisite to a properly conducted study. The following are the principles to remember. So number one, it should be an informed consent. So the researchers should make sure that the participants in the study or shall I say the respondents of the study are aware of the purpose and processes of the study they are participating in. They should also ensure that the only participants who agree in writing will also be included and that they shall not force any participant to join. The next one is the confidentiality and anonymity. So that's why that we already had the law about the Data Privacy Act, no? So any data or information is being gathered by the researchers should be dealt with confidentiality, no? So the researchers should not reveal any information provided by the participants, no? Much so their identity to anyone who are not concerned with the study. All data gathered from surveys or interviews should also be placed in a secure location or a filing system. The next one is the non-maleficence and beneficence. So it means that a study should not do no harm to anyone, especially in researches involving humans. A study should be beneficial for it to be worth implementing. And lastly, concerning about the distributive justice, no? So any study should not disadvantageous to a particular group, especially the marginalized and the oppressed, poor people, the women, for example, LGBTQ plus and the elderly. So therefore, the benefits of the study should be for all. Okay, so gender, sexuality, and human ecology. So human ecology as a field recognizes the interplay among internal and external environments, physical, socioeconomic, cultural. So hence, to look at realities from an ecological perspective is to appreciate that human development across lifespan is influenced by these environments. In the context of gender and sexuality, a human ecological approach looks at human sexual lives and experiences at various levels of spheres of analysis. First, it sees gender and sexuality as an organismic and personal experience. So, for the summary, gender, being male or female, has socially constructed meanings and it is different in every culture and may change with time. It is important to analyze how society enforces gender roles on everyone, so we can further understand how power relations in gender roles can limit an individual's freedom and promote inequality. To help us have a holistic view, we need to use frameworks and methods from different disciplines like psychology, sociology, medicine, law, and among others. You know? Okay, so I guess that will be all. So once again, I'm Sean Xavier Alcalita. Thank you very much.